Hello, everybody. So this is the lecture portion for our class for week 6. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there with you today, and I will see you next week at our regular time on campus. So today we're going to talk about Saville-Troiki chapter 7, which is the very last chapter in the book, and Schmidt chapters 9 and 10. So for Saville-Troiki, basically what we want to do is we want to summarize the linguistic, psychological, and social factors that play a role in second language acquisition. And then in terms of Schmidt, we're basically going to be looking at adjective clauses, adjective phrases, and adverb clauses. And we'll also look at cleft sentences. So we're getting into more complex structures that are very useful for academic writing. These are advanced structures that you would teach to your ESL students in usually levels C1 if you use the Common European Framework. If you have an IEP that has 5 levels, you would probably start to get into these in levels 4 and 5. So they are rather advanced topics in language, so they're more difficult. You expect students obviously to have a good grasp of what adjectives and adverbs are before they can start working sufficiently with adverb clauses and adverb phrases. And in academic manner especially, that makes it even more difficult. So let's start with Saville-Troiki, chapter 7. And basically what they summarize here in this chapter, or she summarizes, is she's looking at the linguistic, psychological, and social factors. That's the way that she's broken down the concepts in this book, as you have seen throughout your reading of the textbook. So pretty much, if you just look at the priorities, linguistic factors generally relate to what? The what of learning a language. The psychological factors generally relate to the how of learning a second language. And the social factors are more closely related to the question, why do people learn a second language? Now, you can't clearly define it that way. That's not the only way of defining it. So you see priorities 2 and 3, move them around a little bit. But let's focus on priority 1 and look at that as the main schemata for how she has divided the content in this book. Kind of slow here because I'm recording and I've got video, so I apologize for that. Let's go. Okay, there we go. So the linguistic is the what. So this came from the textbook. These are the bullet points in the textbook, but let's look at them a little bit more closely. So the what is the system of knowledge. So remember, the linguistic factors, we're looking at the language itself. So it's the linguistic system, meaning the syntax and the parts of speech of the language. Patterns that occur in that language, how language learners encode those patterns. We've talked a lot about pragmatic competence. That has to do with register and knowing which forms are appropriate to choose from in different social situations according to who you are speaking to or writing to and what the topic is that you're thinking about. So you can see how the other questions may overlap with the question of what. Mainly in linguistic, we're looking at the meaning and how students select among those multiple systems or ways of using a language. And finally, communicative competence, which is closely related to pragmatic competence. We talked a lot about this last week, and we've talked about it before, but what's the difference between linguistic competence and communicative competence? So obviously we would also expect linguistic competence to be here under the question or the category of linguistics. And then if we look at the psychological, remember that's inside the language learner's mind, inside their head. So we're looking at the intellectual or mental processes that a language learner uses to learn a second language. So we may talk a little bit about innate capacity. This is the human's ability to learn language. Last class we talked about the LAD, or language acquisition device, which was a concept that was promoted by Chomsky. And he promotes the fact that humans are uniquely capable of learning language because we have this language acquisition device in our minds somewhere. It's more of an abstract concept. It's not a physical place inside our brain that we have, or at least they have not identified it as of yet. With brain research, they have identified several different areas that are related to language learning. We mentioned Baroka's area last class. There are other areas inside the brain that are closely associated with speech and other forms of processing language, vocabulary, but this is our human ability to learn language, and we don't necessarily find those areas in other species. So how do we apply our prior knowledge? That's taking what we already know, so applying the known to the unknown, and then that's how we learn new things. How we process information. There was a big chapter or a big section in one of the chapters in the book about the input theory hypothesis, about the information process theory, where they use input to process language, making the human mind similar to a computer in how language is processed. How we interact with others and how we process that information in the interaction, how we attend to new information, how we store it, how we retrieve vocabulary and language systems in order to formulate our responses in interactions. And then how we restructure our knowledge system. So obviously, as a language learner moves along the continuum in the interlanguage, they're restructuring their knowledge of the language system. So at beginning levels, they have a more rudimentary language system. And later on in language learning, it becomes a more complex knowledge system. So it becomes more and more sophisticated as you add information to that knowledge system. And then finally, we talk about the mapping of relationships or associations, which also occur inside our mind, where we make connections with information that we have already learned. And then that process becomes automatic. So we're not slowly doing it and consciously doing it, where we're looking for the right vocabulary item or looking for the correct system that we want to utilize, like the grammar structure. And we notice that as language learners, that in the beginning it's rather difficult for us to retrieve that information, and later on it becomes more automatic. So then finally, looking at the social, which generally answers the questions, why do we learn a language? So it depends on your social context. Who are you interacting with? And what kinds of people and what kinds of situations, and why are you interacting with them? Do you need another language to be able to interact with them? What is your social experience? Is it a positive experience? Do you enjoy these people? Do you like interacting with them? Do you need to interact with them? Is it essential for survival or career advancement or for meeting your needs? And also we can look at the relationships between the L1 and the L2 in that social environment. So is the L1 something that's looked down upon by members in the L2 society, or is it something that is esteemed? If it's looked down upon, then you might hide your knowledge of the L1. Sometimes that happens with immigrants to the US. might want to blend and integrate with the society and be afraid that people might look down on their L1. So sometimes, for example, immigrant parents will want to mainstream their children and not allow their children to speak their L1 because they want them to integrate into the L2, so their L1 becomes repressed. And this is a perception of the parents. The society at large may or may not look down upon the L1, but the parents perceive it as a problem. So therefore, they encourage their children to learn the L2 and forget their L1. Age, you might wonder why age is listed under a social factor, but the age of the person may affect the way that people interact with you. They may show you more respect if you're elderly. They may ignore you if you're a child. They may let children get away with things that they wouldn't let adults get away with, so children can be more audacious with their language learning opportunities. So the perception of how we treat people according to their age can affect their language acquisition. Aptitude is the natural ability for learning language. Some people tend to be better at language than others. Other people might be better at other types of skills, like mathematics or music, for example. But sometimes those aptitudes overlap because people who are good at music might be very good at picking up intonation and pronunciation in another language because they have a good musical ear for language and sound and pitch and nuances of language as well as speech. The motivation for learning a language, why do you want to learn that language? Is it to interact with people in a new culture, to travel, to promote your work, and work takes place inside a social context. And then finally looking at instruction. So did you learn the second language in a formal environment, in a classroom, which includes teachers and peers and classmates, and materials such as textbooks or videos, handouts, worksheets that were created for use in formal instruction? Or did you teach yourself using these materials? All of these artifacts are produced by a society or individuals inside those societies. Or did you learn just by interacting with people and not receive formal instruction, but it was just more due to your interaction with those people? So those are the main ways that the author divides the content in this book. And those might be C-level heads under your B-level heads of social and linguistic and psychological factors. So once again, that's just a suggestion, a way to organize your case study. By now, you have already made that choice, and I'm eagerly waiting for your papers to be submitted at 6 o'clock, and I'm looking forward to reading those. So I have a couple little things that I want to do to wrap up this textbook and your check for comprehension. Your understanding of these second language acquisition theories is very, very important. So I've uploaded a handout to Blackboard. It's called Comparing Key Concepts to Classroom Practice. So I would like you to complete that individually. It's just a matching activity. So you have the second column that you need to match with the first column. And there is a link in Blackboard. So once you complete that handout, please submit your responses to the handout to Blackboard directly. That's an individual activity. Then there's also a small group work activity. And I would like you to complete the handout that is called Issues and Teaching Implications in Second Language Acquisition, which I have also uploaded to the Week 6 folder in Blackboard. So this one you can do as a group project. Please do it in your grammar study groups. You can do it together online and divide the labor, or you could do it the next time that you meet with your grammar study groups, but this should be uploaded. Actually, both activities should be uploaded before 6 o'clock next Monday, before our next class. For this group activity, please just submit one handout inside your grammar study groups. There's a file exchange where you can upload documents to share with each other inside your grammar study group. So one person can just upload the file there, so I can see it there. And you can just use a bullet point format. You don't need to write long paragraphs. Just include 3 to 5 issues as well as 3 to 5 pedagogical implications. So the issues are the key points. They're the main ideas of the chapter. And the pedagogical implications, that means, what does this mean for language teaching? So now that you know these theories about how people learn second languages, how does that affect language teaching? How might you incorporate this information into your teaching? What are the implications for how we teach language based on these key points in the chapter? So just use bullet points, and please upload this before next Monday. So I'm going to stop the video here because I'm concerned about it being too long and heavy to upload to Blackboard. So I'll upload it into several different segments. So I'm going to stop it here. So this will be part 1, and I will upload this portion of it. And then I'll continue the video with Schmidt's chapters 9 and 10. So let me stop recording, and I'll upload the video, and I'll begin the second part.